Love is often celebrated as an unbreakable bond, a force capable of overcoming all obstacles. But what happens when that love is rooted in secrets and deception? In this story, what was meant to be a symbol of new beginnings, a wedding, turns into a nightmare of betrayal, heartbreak, and bloodshed, set in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. This tragic tale unfolds behind the pristine walls of what should have been a perfect ceremony. The air is filled with joy and anticipation, but hidden beneath the surface are dark secrets waiting to be exposed. This is the story of Derek, Leah, and Taryn, three lives forever altered by the choices they made and the truths they try to hide. At the center of it all stands Leah, the radiant bride. Beside her is Derek, her devoted fiancé, and just a few steps away is Taryn, Derek's best friend since childhood. The trio appears close, their bond forged over years of shared memories, laughter, and trust. But beneath the warmth of their connection lies a dangerous truth, one that threatens to destroy everything. Derek and Taryn share a relationship far deeper than anyone else realizes. What began as friendship grew into something neither of them dared to name. For years, they remained inseparable. They could finish each other's sentences, communicate with a glance, and find comfort in each other's silence. To the outside world, they were just best friends. But within that bond was something unspoken, powerful, and quietly consuming. When Leah entered their lives, she was drawn to the connection between the two men. She admired how close they were and believed it spoke to Derek's capacity for deep love and loyalty. She had no idea that the same qualities she cherished in Derek were born from a love he could never fully reveal. As the wedding day approached, Derek was plagued by an anxiety he couldn't explain. He loved Leah genuinely, but he also carried a secret that weighed heavily on his heart. The life he had shared with Taryn in silence and shadows. It was a past he had tried to bury, but one that refused to stay hidden. Taryn noticed a change. He saw the way Derek's smile never quite reached his eyes, how his laughter seemed hollow and forced. Leah, in her joy, remained unaware of the storm gathering just beneath the surface. She couldn't see the lingering looks exchanged between the two men, or feel the tension that pulsed whenever they were alone. To understand how they arrived at this moment, we must go back, before the engagement, before the suits and flowers and vows. It started on a night like any other. Derek and Taryn sat together in quiet companionship, as they had so many times before. But something was different that evening. The air between them felt heavy, charged. For years, they had danced around the truth of their feelings. They had built walls to keep themselves safe, to preserve the simplicity of friendship. But that night, the lines blurred. A glance lingered a second too long. A touch meant to be innocent carried too much weight. The boundary between friendship and something more was finally, irreversibly crossed. What followed was a whirlwind, confusion, passion, fear. In a single night, everything changed. They were no longer just friends. And from that moment on, the truth hung over them like a shadow, threatening to destroy everything they had built. Now, on the most important day of Derek's life, that shadow looms larger than ever. As he stands at the altar, torn between the woman he's vowed to love and the man he's never stopped loving, one decision will set into motion a chain of events that no one can stop. What was meant to be a celebration of love will become a reckoning. And no one, not Derek, not Leah, not even Taryn, will leave untouched. They become something else. Something neither of them could easily define, and something they both knew they could never reveal. In the days and weeks that followed, they buried their secret deep beneath layers of routine and denial, hidden from the world and, most heartbreakingly, from Leah. But with each stolen glance, every secret encounter, the burden of their deception grew heavier. Derek found himself trapped between two lives, the one he had always known, the one he was expected to live, and the other, the life he had only just begun to glimpse. It was a life steeped in a love that was equal parts terrifying and overwhelming. Taryn felt it too, an aching dread of what they had allowed to happen, and even greater fear of what would follow if the truth ever came to light. As the wedding day crept closer, the tension between Derek and Taryn became impossible to ignore. They tried to pretend nothing had changed, as though their relationship was still built on innocent brotherhood. But deep down, they both knew the truth. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. Derek's behavior began to change. He swung wildly between joy and despair, excitement and paralyzing fear. He threw himself into wedding preparations with a fervent energy that caught everyone off guard. But to those who knew him best, the cracks were beginning to show. His eyes were tired, his hands often trembled, and he was easily startled by the smallest things. The closer the big day came, the more unsteady he became. Taryn, on the surface, remained composed, calm, supportive. But inside, he was a hurricane of emotions, love, guilt, jealousy, and a looming sense of inevitable loss. He had been a part of Derek's life for so long, always present, always dependable. But now, as Derek prepared to marry someone else, Taryn felt like a man clinging to a vanishing shoreline. Leah, in her blissful ignorance, remained focused on the details. Her dress, the flowers, the guest list. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Her heart full of dreams about the life she was about to begin with the man she adored. She didn't notice the way Derek would sometimes drift off, staring into space as if haunted by something she couldn't see. She didn't catch how his hands twitched when he spoke of their future, or how he sometimes recoiled from her touch, as if flinching from a ghost. Then there were the moments, small, quiet, but impossible to ignore, between Derek and Taryn. A glance that lingered too long. A touch on the arm that carried more meaning than it should have. A whisper exchanged amidst the noise of a crowded room. These fleeting exchanges spoke volumes, and while Leah may not have understood them, others who witnessed them felt something wasn't quite right. Taryn was crumbling inside. He knew the wedding would be the end. Once vows were spoken and rings exchanged, whatever existed between them, whatever they refused to name, would have to be buried for good. The days leading up to the ceremony were excruciating. Each moment shared with Derek felt like both a gift and a wound. Derek began waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his chest tight with panic. He'd lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, drowning in thoughts of what he was about to do and what he was about to lose. Taryn remained close, ever present. But there was a distance between them now, a silence weighted with things left unsaid. The fear, the guilt, the inevitability of what lay ahead. It built a wall between them neither had the strength to tear down. And so, with each passing day, the pressure mounted. The unspoken tension between Derek and Taryn reached a fever pitch. The wedding day loomed like a thundercloud on the horizon, dark, threatening, and ready to unleash devastation. Derek was ensnared in a web of his own creation, and he knew that no matter what path he chose, someone was going to get hurt. The only question was how much, and how soon. At last, the wedding day arrived. A day meant for joy, for unity, for the start of something beautiful. Derek stood at the altar, his heart pounding, not with anticipation, but with dread. As Leah walked down the aisle, each step she took felt like another nail sealing the fate of the life he thought he could lead. Taryn stood just a few feet away, playing the role of best man, one he had filled in more ways than anyone knew. But today, that title felt like a lead weight. As Derek recited his vows, the words rang hollow in his ears. His voice trembled. He glanced at Taryn, who managed to smile, but Derek could see it. The pain in his eyes, the silent plea, the heartbreak of watching the man he loved marry someone else. The ceremony proceeded exactly as planned. Vows were exchanged, rings were slipped onto fingers, and the couple was pronounced husband and wife. Guests applauded, cameras flashed, and everything unfolded as it should have. But for Derek, each word spoken and each ceremonial gesture was a painful reminder of the truth he had buried deep inside, a truth he could never confess, and a love he could never openly claim. At the reception, the atmosphere buzzed with joy. Music played, champagne flowed, and laughter filled the room. Yet Derek felt none of it. His mind was a storm of emotions, torn between a life he had just publicly committed to and the private, powerful connection with Taryn that had emerged in the shadows of the past few weeks. Leah, radiant and glowing, was wrapped in happiness. She floated through the room on a cloud of love, blissfully unaware of the inner chaos tormenting her new husband. But as the night wore on, even she began to sense that something was off. Derek's smile seemed strained, his laughter lacking its usual warmth. He looked like a man going through the motions, not one celebrating the happiest day of his life. Taryn, too, was unraveling. Every congratulatory hug, every toast of bride and groom, felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He forced smiles and raised glasses, but inside, he was breaking. He and Derek exchanged tense, fleeting glances throughout the evening. Their shared secret hung between them like a dark cloud, invisible to most but suffocating to them. For everyone else, it was a day of love and celebration. But for Derek and Taryn, it was a bittersweet reminder of everything they were trying to suppress. The weight of what they had done, and what they were still hiding, was growing heavier with every passing hour. As the reception began to wind down, Derek's unease became impossible to ignore. Leah noticed how distracted he seemed, how often his eyes drifted toward the entrance or across the room, as if searching for someone. She tried to chalk it up to exhaustion, telling herself the day had been long and emotional. But deep down, she felt a gnawing unease. Derek had always been present, attentive, loving. Tonight he felt distant, almost attached. Every time she reached for his hand or whispered in his ear, he responded with short, distracted answers. His body was beside her, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. And Leah couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just tired. He was conflicted. The truth was, Derek couldn't stop thinking about Taryn. Their affair, unexpected, passionate, and all-consuming, had begun shortly before the wedding. It had thrown him into emotional chaos. He had tried to suppress it, to tell himself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. But the feelings hadn't faded. They had only intensified. Now, on the night he was meant to begin a new life with Leah, guilt and confusion threatened to consume him. He wanted to be the husband she believed he was. He wanted to be honest, to be whole. But his heart was fractured, one half with Leah, the other irreversibly tied to Taryn. Taryn was struggling just as much. The affair had been short-lived, but it had awakened something in both of them they couldn't ignore. Watching Derek with Leah tonight was more painful than he'd expected. Each touch between the newlyweds, each loving glance, felt like a slap, a vivid reminder of what he would never have. Taryn saw the torment in Derek's eyes, the way he avoided locking eyes with Leah for too long, the way his gaze kept returning to Taryn across the room. They had spent weeks hiding their feelings, their connection. But tonight, the strain was beginning to show. The tension between them was palpable, barely noticeable to the average guest, but unmistakable to anyone who knew them well. Eventually, the evening came to an end. Derek and Leah retired to their bridal suite. Leah was still full of excitement, imagining a romantic first night as husband and wife. But Derek was distant. He couldn't bring himself to engage. The thought of intimacy filled him with dread, not because he didn't love Leah, but because it felt like a betrayal, not just of her, but of Taryn too. He made excuses, told her he was exhausted, blamed the day's stress. Leah, though disappointed, accepted it with grace. She kissed him goodnight, trying to be understanding, but something in her heart shifted. A small seed of doubt had been planted. Derek lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, his mind a battlefield of love, guilt, and fear. He knew he was hurting Leah, that she deserved honesty and devotion, but he couldn't pretend, not anymore. The guilt was suffocating. The feeling for Taryn, undeniable. After hours of tossing and turning, Derek made a decision. He needed to talk to Taryn. He had to find clarity. He needed to try and make sense of the emotional wreckage before it destroyed them all. They had created something fragile, forbidden, and deeply complicated. And maybe, just maybe, if they could talk, Derek could finally settle his mind, find a sliver of peace, and figure out how to move forward. Unable to sleep, he quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Leah. The hotel hallways were dark and still, the silence amplifying the storm inside him. As he walked toward Taryn's room, his heart pounded, not with anticipation, but with dread. He didn't know what he hoped to accomplish, only that he needed to see Taryn. They needed to talk. They needed to confront the unresolved tension that had been growing between them for weeks. With each step, his feet fell heavier, as if his own body was resisting what he was about to do. When he finally reached the door, he paused. His hand hovered before he knocked. Then 3 soft taps. There was a long, agonizing pause before the door creaked open. Taryn stood in the dim light, wearing nothing but his underwear. His expression mirrored Derek's, haunted, conflicted, vulnerable. They didn't need words. Both knew why Derek was there. Without speaking, Derek stepped inside. The door shut behind him with a quiet click that sounded louder than it should have. Final, like a point of no return. They sat down, neither quite sure where or how to begin. The air was thick with everything they weren't saying. Derek opened his mouth to speak, to put words to the ache in his chest, but nothing came out. His voice caught in his throat, choked by doubt and shame. Finally, he managed to whisper. He confessed his love, told Taryn he couldn't let go, that no matter how much he tried, his heart still belonged to him. He admitted the unbearable guilt he felt, the confusion, the sense that he was slowly losing control. Then he asked the question that had been haunting him. What were we supposed to do now? But before either of them could find an answer, the emotions that had been simmering for so long finally boiled over. The weight of their silence, the pain of separation, and the need for release collided in a single, desperate moment. They gave in. The affair, so new, so raw, erupted once more in the darkness of Taryn's room. It was a moment of weakness, yes, but also of clarity. A last grasp at something they both knew was already slipping through their fingers. It didn't last long. Just as quickly as it began, it ended, leaving them breathless, ashamed, and drowning in guilt. Derek pulled away first. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, his mind spinning. All he could think about was Leah, the vows he had just taken, the promises he had made. And now, they felt broken beyond repair. He knew he couldn't go back. Not yet. Not like this. He couldn't face Leah with the weight of his betrayal pressing down on his chest like an anchor. Taryn sat in silence, his expression hollow. They had crossed a line they both knew could never be uncrossed. Whatever they'd shared was no longer a secret held in shadows. It was a reality that had altered the course of all three lives. Back in the bridal suite, Leah stirred. Half asleep, she reached out for Derek. Her hand landed on a cold, empty space. Jolted awake, her eyes flew open. "Derek," she called softly. No response. She sat up, her heart racing. Panic crept in. She slipped out of bed, pulled on a robe, and stepped into the hallway. The hotel was eerily quiet, every sound magnified by her growing dread. Her footsteps echoed as she walked, her mind spiraling with questions and increasingly dark possibilities. Something wasn't right. Somehow, her feet led her to Taryn's door. She stopped, a knot twisted in her stomach, as she raised her hand to knock. Once. Silence. Twice. Louder this time. Still nothing. She knocked a third time, her knuckles trembling. At last, the door opened. Taryn stood there, wide-eyed, shirtless, guilt written all over his face. His expression was enough. Leah didn't need to see Derek. She didn't need to ask questions. She already knew. The truth hit her like a wave, cold, brutal, undeniable. In that moment, the illusion of her perfect day shattered, and everything she thought she knew came crashing down. What had been lurking in the shadows was now staring Leah in the face. Undeniable, devastating. The man she had just married, the man she thought she knew, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. And in that moment, her world collapsed. The door had creaked open, and Leah stood frozen in the doorway, her mind struggling to process the scene before her. Taryn, dressed in nothing but his underwear, stood with guilt etched across his face. Just beyond him, Derek, her husband of only a few hours, sat on the edge of bed, his face a mixture of shame and despair. The truth, what had been gnawing at the edges of her consciousness, now crashed into her with brutal clarity. Betrayal, humiliation, rage. The emotions surged through Leah like a tidal wave, swift, consuming, uncontrollable. Her voice trembled as she demanded answers, her words sharp and venomous. Derek, desperate and cornered, tried to explain, but the words caught his throat, useless and weak. Taryn, equally horrified, could only stand there paralyzed as the situation unraveled before him. Leah's anger escalated quickly. Her hands shook as she pointed at Derek, her voice rising with every word. The betrayal cut deeper than she had ever thought possible. The pain gave way to something darker, something more dangerous. In a flash of uncontrollable emotion, Leah lunged at Derek. Her fury drove her forward, the room erupting into chaos. The tension that had simmered for hours finally snapped. Derek tried to hold her back, his voice pleading, urging her to calm down, but she couldn't hear him. The betrayal had shattered something inside her, something irreparable. Taryn stood torn, caught between the man he loved and the wreckage their affair had caused. He tried to intervene, but it was too late. The confrontation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Then, at the height of her rage, Leah acted without thinking. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy, decorative lamp, and with a scream of anguish, swung it with all her strength. Time seemed to freeze. The lamp connected with Derek's head. In a sickening thud, his body crumpled to the floor, unmoving. Blood spread rapidly across the carpet, the deep red stark against the soft beige. A stunned silence filled the room. Taryn rushed to Derek's side, his hands shaking as he tried to stop the bleeding. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Derek's lifeless eyes stared up at him, and the reality of what had just happened began to set in. Leah stood frozen, the truth crashing down on her. She had killed her husband. Yet, the rage hadn't completely left her. Grief and madness twisted inside her like a storm. Her gaze snapped to Taryn, and she saw not a grieving man, but the one responsible, the one who had destroyed her marriage before it even began. Blinded by pain and humiliation, she turned on him. She screamed accusations, blamed him for everything, for the affair, the deception, the heartbreak. And before she could think, before she could stop herself, she lashed out again. Taryn, caught off guard, barely had time to react before her attack landed. Leah's hands, driven by agony and desperation, struck him with raw force. The second blow, fueled by unrelenting grief, knocked Taryn to the ground. His body collapsed beside Derek's. Blood from both men spread slowly across the cold, unforgiving floor. The two lives once so connected now ended side by side. Then came silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that filled the room like smoke. Leah stood in the center, her breath ragged, her body trembling. Her mind reeled, unable to comprehend what she had just done. The lamp slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the floor near the two men. The sound echoed in the stillness like a closing door. She sank to her knees beside Derek, her hands hovering above his body, trembling, as if afraid to touch him, afraid to confirm what she already knew. She reached out, shaking him gently, whispering his name, as if hoping he might wake up and this nightmare would vanish. But he didn't move. He never would. The enormity of her actions struck her like a physical blow. Cold, merciless clarity settled in. She had destroyed everything. Love, trust, and the life she had just begun. And now there was no way back. But Derek didn't move. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, lifeless and glassy. The horror of what Leah had done washed over her in waves, cold, unrelenting, and paralyzing. Her cries grew louder, more desperate, as the realization sank in. There was no undoing this. No going back. The man she had loved, the man she had vowed to spend her life with, was gone, taken from her by her own hands, in a moment of uncontrollable rage. Beside him lay Taryn, his face frozen in an expression of shock and terror. His body was just as still, just as cold. The man who had stood beside Derek as best friend and secret lover was now just another casualty of one woman's heartbreak and betrayal. Leah's mind spiraled into chaos. Thoughts collided and tumbled over one another in a frantic search for a solution, for a way to undo what had just happened. But no matter where she looked, she saw no escape, only devastation. Her wide, panicked eyes scanned the room, seeking something, anything, that could make it all go away. But there was nothing, no miracle, no rewind button, only the truth. The blood on her hands, on the floor, even splattered on the once pristine white walls. It was all too real, too permanent. No amount of scrubbing could cleanse what she had done. Frantically, she tried anyway. Her hands rubbed at the red stains, her sobs echoing against the cold, unforgiving walls. But the blood wouldn't come off, and with each passing second, The futility of her efforts became clearer. The room, once a place of joy and celebration, was now a chamber of horror. What had once symbolized new beginnings now stood as the final chapter of a love twisted by secrecy, betrayal, and pain. Exhausted and broken, Leah collapsed to the floor beside Derek and Taryn. Her body trembled with uncontrollable sobs. The weight of what she had done and all that she had lost settled over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. She was alone now, completely and utterly alone, with nothing but the echoes of her actions to accompany her, the silence pressing around her. What was left? What now? As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, painting the room in soft, golden hues, Leah knew there was no hiding from what she had done, no escaping the consequences. Whether she ran or stayed, whether she tried to cover up the crime or surrender to the authorities, nothing could undo the tragedy that had unfolded. Her life, once so full of promise and hope, was now irreparably shattered, broken beyond repair by a single brutal night. A night that began with vows of eternal love and ended in bloodshed. What was meant to be a celebration of unity, devotion, and new beginnings had instead become a night defined by betrayal, violence, and death. The wedding, once a symbol of happiness and dreams fulfilled, now lay in ruins, its joy replaced by unimaginable sorrow, its sacred vows drowned in the dark truths that had surfaced far too late. The now empty wedding venue would soon become a crime scene. Its silence would echo with memories of what could have been and with the weight of what had come to pass. Leah, the bride who had once imagined a life of love and laughter, now sat alone. Her tear-streaked face reflected a loss so profound, so complete, that no words had ever expressed it. This was a night where love turned to hatred, trust gave way to betrayal, and life was stolen by the very hands that once promised to protect it. As we look back on the events of this night, we are forced to confront the broader, haunting implications. Derek, Taryn, and Leah were not simply characters in a tragic love triangle. They were human beings, flawed, vulnerable, shaped by societal expectations, hidden desires, and the crushing weight of secrets they thought they had to keep. But those secrets, buried under shame and silence, became the fuel for their destruction. This story challenges us to reflect on the human condition, on how we navigate love, loyalty, and identity in a world that often demands we choose between our true selves and the roles we are told to play. The wedding rings, once shining symbols of unity, now lie forgotten, discarded, broken, and there, in the center of it all, stands Leah, isolated and alone, a woman who has lost everything, a woman whose hands ended the very lives she once cherished. She is now left to bear the unbearable weight of her actions, driven by heartbreak, madness, and grief. This story forces us to confront the devastating impact of betrayal, the burden of living a lie, and the irreversible damage caused by suppressed truths. It reminds us just how easily love can curdle into hatred, how fragile trust truly is, and how secrets, especially the ones we hide even from ourselves, can destroy lives. As the screen fades to black, we leave you with this final question. In a world where the truth is so often hidden beneath layers of guilt, fear, and obligation, what are the risks we take by living a life that's not our own? And when the truth finally surfaces, who pays the ultimate price? This was a story of love lost, trust betrayed, and lives forever changed. A story that won't soon be forgotten.